Well, the day has finally come. The Democrats have announced that they are officially now going to start the impeachment process against President Donald Trump. Now, there are people who have been calling for this since well before Trump was even inaugurated. And so here we are. It took them 3 years, but they finally got their wish, or at least the first part of it. Of course, ultimately, the hope of the proponents of such a process would be to actually impeach Trump, not just to start the process. But this is not the beginning of the end, but rather the end of the beginning, as Winston Churchill would say. Now, it was very interesting to see Nancy Pelosi get up there and make somewhat of a case for impeachment, considering that she's been so reluctant to impeach Trump over these last couple of years. Because as the head of the Democrats in the House, she's had to listen to a lot of individual Democrats from isolated districts who felt that it was their responsibility on behalf of their constituents to make sure that Trump was impeached, and Pelosi had to, sort of dial those people back and say, hey, the majority of the country is not going to like that. It wouldn't be good for the whole caucus if we do that. Yes, your voters might want it, but most voters don't. And, she had to play that line with them and say, hey, why don't we wait for something a little more serious before we go impeaching the guy and making ourselves look like fools, which is, certainly a possibility. But now, obviously, Pelosi feels like she has something that's serious enough that she actually can impeach, because with the RussiaGate stuff, I have to give her some credit and say that she never started the impeachment process over that. She, was waiting that out to see if anything became of it, and obviously she knew, just like the rest of the reasonable people, it would seem, that there really wasn't anything to the RussiaGate stuff. And so she would look like an idiot if she started the impeachment process and then it all, turned out to be a nothing burger, which it was. But now she's found her new cause, and that is UkraineGate. And and the irony, I think, is being lost on a lot of people that, at first, for the first couple of years, 3 years, I guess, because they're still accusing him, of Trump's presidency, they accused him of colluding with the Russians, okay? And now the big accusation is that he colluded with the Ukrainians, the Russians' arch nemesis. I just find that funny. It's like you couldn't pick another country. You couldn't say that he was, colluding with, the Kazakhs or something, or the Lithuanians, or the Poles. But even though this sounds on the surface like this story is kind of the polar opposite of RussiaGate, and it couldn't be further from that, it really, when you start to look into what their exact accusations are against Trump, this really just sounds like RussiaGate 2.0, because what is it that they accuse Trump of doing? They say, well, he threatened to withhold, military aid in the form of like $400 million from the Ukrainian government. And, of course, who does it help, the Democrats say, when the Ukrainians are denied their free money to buy bombs and guns from the U.S.? Well, of course, it's Vladimir Putin. Because you see, the Ukrainians, they're entitled to this $400 million. Trump had no right to take that away. That was their money because they needed that to fight the Russians. And we all know that it's America's. It says right there in right there in the preamble of the Constitution that one of the main goals of ratifying our Constitution that our founders had was that they wanted to make sure that the president directs funding to every group that's at war with the Russians at any time in history. I mean, that is a fundamental bedrock principle of America. We always have to fund whoever's at war with Russia. Or so you would be led to believe based on Nancy Pelosi's press conference yesterday, because that's really what it sounded like to me. That's what the Democrats sound like they're saying, is that, hey, Trump, he's just not hawkish enough, and we got to get him out of there. We need someone who's much more pro-war. Not only someone maybe who would give money to Ukraine, but maybe someone who would, join the war on their behalf. I really wonder how they think that this is going to be a big, popular decision on their part. Maybe they're not going to focus on the reasoning behind the impeachment. Maybe they'll just focus on Trump is bad. That's why we're impeaching him. But, I mean, their reason for impeaching him doesn't seem like something that, would really enrage or energize the average American because, it doesn't affect any American really, unless you're a Ukrainian or Russian immigrant with family back in those countries. What happens in that war, whether Ukraine wins or Russia wins, it doesn't affect a single American who's in this country. I mean, the idea that the U.S. government, that it's in our vital national security interest to somehow intervene in every border dispute in the entire country, or in the entire world. Do you know how many border disputes there have been in, American history in other countries? There's been countless border disputes. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If I were a Democrat in the House looking for a reason to impeach Trump, I would be looking towards the Middle East, not towards Eastern Europe, because the war in Yemen that Trump has continued to wage, that Obama started, or that Obama joined in after the Saudis started, that is completely unconstitutional and totally illegal. And that war, that illegal war that Trump has continued to prosecute, has, without congressional approval, has led to the deaths of untold thousands of civilians. Certainly tens of thousands. Also quite likely hundreds of thousands. We have no way of knowing at this point. Perhaps we'll be able to, count the bodies, sometime in the future after there is no war, but the war, there's really no end in sight at this point. Thanks in large part to American assistance for the Saudis and Al-Qaeda. Those are our allies in that war, by the way. Seems to me that it would be much easier, rather than trying to make the case that Trump should be impeached because he didn't give enough taxpayer money to a foreign government to wage some war in Eastern Europe. It seems like it would be much easier to make the case that Trump should be impeached because he was waging an illegal war that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. And by the way, we're fighting the war on behalf of Al-Qaeda. That, to me, seems like the kind of issue that would generate a teensy bit more popular support amongst the American people. But, of course, Nancy cannot bring herself to do that because she knows that the Yemen War fits squarely within the Overton window of the bipartisan foreign policy consensus. Whereas denying funding or threatening to deny funding to the Ukrainian government, while a pretty minor slight, is well outside of the Overton window of the bipartisan foreign policy consensus. In other words, if you compare UkraineGate to the Yemen War, one of them is an offense to the American people, that is the war in Yemen, and the other one is an offense to the D.C. establishment and the military-industrial complex, and basically all of Nancy Pelosi's friends. So of course Nancy is going to pick the UkraineGate one. Another thing I forgot to mention is apparently Trump is going to release the transcript of his phone call with the president of Ukraine, in which the Democrats accuse him of trying to withhold money. And my guess is that Trump probably wouldn't be releasing that transcript if, in fact, he had said something naughty that the military-industrial complex, would disapprove of. Methinks that old President Trump wouldn't be releasing this transcript if it didn't completely vindicate him. And that's why many people are predicting, though I'm not confident enough to make this prediction myself, that this releasing of the transcript will probably end this whole UkraineGate story, and perhaps even turn this right around on Joe Biden. But we will have to wait and see. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.